Republican lawmakers are beginning to pull their support from the deal. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, said just a few hours ago that the bill will not become law. Just for a reminder, a quick reminder of how we got here, Republicans had insisted on changes to immigration policy that they be added to any package that included aid to Ukraine and Israel. So Senate Democrats and one independent went along with that and created in a bipartisan way what the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board today said was, quote, by any honest reckoning, the most restrictive migrant legislation in decades. They meant that as a compliment. And now Republicans are refusing to take yes for an answer. Donald Trump wants to use the border crisis as an election issue. And with us now to discuss, Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. She's an independent and was one of the three lead negotiators on the border deal. Senator, is your deal already dead?
Well, unfortunately, Jake, it appears that politics have overtaken practical policy once again in Washington, D.C. You know, when my colleagues said back in September that the border crisis was a national security imperative and must be paired with a solution to fight Putin, to, of course, stand with our allies in Israel and to stand with Taiwan, I stood up and said a wholehearted yes. You know, I'm a child of the border. It is my state that has been an unmitigated crisis for decades. And I agree, it is a national security crisis. And so, as you know, for the last 4.5 months, I brought Republicans and Democrats together to form a real solution to address our border crisis. And unfortunately today, my colleagues in the United States Senate have decided that they don't actually want this solution and don't want to secure the border. And I'm disappointed. But I'm mostly disappointed, Jake, for the folks back home, because my state is still in crisis and will be tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
You have said that you asked the Senate Majority Leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer, to push the vote to Thursday. Is that what you still want, or is that just off the table because Republicans are signaling that they're not going to do it?
Well, yesterday, some of my Republican colleagues told me that they would like a little more time to read the bill before getting onto the bill and having a robust amendment process. And I agreed. So I did ask Leader Schumer if he would consider pushing the vote a little bit later. He agreed. But unfortunately today, Senate Republicans indicated that a delay isn't needed, that they don't want to move forward on this bill.
Now, we've reported on the show that the very conservative Border Patrol Union is supportive of this legislation. They say it's not perfect, but it's a much better than status quo. Donald Trump, however, posted on Truth Social, quote, only a fool or a radical left Democrat would vote for this horrendous border bill. Don't be stupid, unquote. How much is he the problem? How much is his push to keep this as an issue for the election, which is what Senator Mitt Romney says is the problem? How much of that is what is resulting in what happened today?
Well, Jake, I believe that each senator has to take responsibility for his or her own decisions. And so, look, it doesn't matter what one candidate or the other says. What matters is what individual senators choose to do. And I can tell you that I always choose to do what is right for Arizona. And that's why I've been partnering closely with Brandon Judd, the president of the Border Patrol Council. As you heard and have seen, they came out and supported this legislation because it will make a real difference in border communities' experience every day. Our bill ends catch and release. It allows us to shut down the border during times of high flow, like today and every other day this year. And so while some folks might want to point blame to one person or the other, the reality is, Jake, is each of us senators is sent to this city and to the Capitol to do one thing, and that is to take votes, to make laws on behalf of our constituents. So we each bear the responsibility for analyzing this bill and making a decision. And as I've been saying to my colleagues in the last several days, take a look at the bill and then make a decision. Do you want to secure the border? And unfortunately, Jake, it sounds like a lot of folks, their answer is no.
So Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst said about this deal, quote, I'm very disappointed that so many of our members came out as a hard no before the legislation was even released. I wish we had given James Lankford, who also worked with you on the bill, the benefit of the doubt to take a look at the text before we started speaking our opposition. But then she went on to say something along the lines of, but the political climate has made it so that, you know, having a vote on this is untenable. And I'm just wondering what you think about that excuse, the idea that the political climate is now impossible to get this passed, as opposed to what you were just talking about, individual senators, taking a vote on the merits of the legislation?
Well, Jake, you and I have had a conversation about the political climate before, and my position remains unchanged. It's unfortunate that we are working in a Washington where individuals are more interested in their next primary, they're more interested in what the base wants to hear, and are frankly more interested in the politics of a situation rather than making good policy. Now, I know I'm a little bit different than many of the folks here in the Senate, but I believe that it's our job to come here each day and work on behalf of what's right for our constituents. Now, Jake, for a lot of people, the border is a political issue, and they would rather have immigration and border not solved so they can keep talking about it. But I can promise you this, back home in Arizona, people in elected and important positions of both political parties came out immediately endorsing this bill, whether it be a county supervisor in Yuma, or the mayor of one of my small towns, or our governor, or our own sheriffs, because they understand that the politics might be easy for folks in other states. But in places like Arizona, an actual border state, it's not about the politics. It's about the damage that occurs every day from our failure to address this crisis.
There are conservatives who say even though they want border reforms, the people who negotiated this bill just did this incorrectly. Eric Erickson said in a post that you misread the room. He writes, quote, "Close the border. That's what people say they want. They didn't ask for a multi-thousand-page piece of legislation. People have no faith that Congress can do small things competently. They sure as hell don't trust Congress to do big things competently," unquote. Now, okay, first of all, it's not thousands of pages, but it is a big piece of legislation. And I'm wondering what you think of that criticism. Eric basically is saying, look, President Biden could take serious actions today to limit the number of migrants illegally crossing. So why is this even needed?
Now, that's an important point, Jake, and I want to address that specifically. There is no doubt that the Biden administration could be doing a much better job of securing our border. And folks have heard me criticize this administration time and time again over the last 3 years for their failure to appropriately address this crisis. But it is absolutely true that there are tools that our government needs to have through statute to do a better and more complete job. One of those things that we must do is change the asylum standard. Right now, it's much too easy to claim asylum, even if you have no legal right to it. 4 out of 5 people who come to the border and claim asylum pass the initial screening right now. That's absurd, when only 15% of people ultimately gain asylum in our country. So we have to change that by statute. A second thing is closing the border. We had the authority during COVID to close the border under Title 42. As we know, a court ended that authority after the COVID pandemic ended. Our bill creates a new legal authority in statute that both allows and requires the government to shut down the border during times of heavy traffic. Those are just 2 examples of statutory changes that we have to give to this administration or a future administration in order for them to fully protect the border.
One of the points made by the Wall Street Journal editorial board and others is that in previous efforts to have immigration reform during the Bush administration, Bush Jr. and Obama, these conservative type restrictions that are in your legislation were paired with things that progressives wanted, like a path to legal status for the Dreamers or things along those lines. And this time, the progressives didn't get anything. It was honestly just more restrictions, and the Wall Street Journal calls this the most conservative, something along the lines of the most conservative immigration compromise that they've seen in the last 20 years. I'm just wondering, like, what your response is when you hear people who voted for more previous more liberal immigration compromises. I'm thinking of the Gang of Eight and Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Lindsey Graham, now opposing something that is more conservative.
Well, Jake, this was not an immigration package. This was a border security package. And so the Wall Street Journal was correct when they said that this had the strictest migration policies that they've seen in decades. That is accurate because the crisis is so severe. As you know, in December, we saw thousands of individuals crossing illegally into Arizona every single day. And even just yesterday, over 6,500 individuals came through our ports of entry and between our ports of entry illegally just yesterday. So I have been reminding my colleagues that if my bill were law, none of that would be occurring because the border would be shut down right now. So we are in a very different situation than we've been in the past. This is a border security bill, not an immigration package. What is hard for me to understand, Jake, is why individual senators have chosen not to move forward on a package that they themselves have demanded. A package which creates, as you've said, some of the strictest migration policies in decades. And one could ask, what is the motivation here? Now, I don't know what it is, but what I can tell you is this. We have a clear choice about whether or not to secure the border, and many colleagues have said today that they do not have an interest in doing so. But make no mistake, Jake, I'm going to ensure that we do take a vote on this piece of legislation. All senators will get to vote on whether or not they want to secure the border. And as an Arizonan who represents the border state facing the worst brunt of this crisis, I'm going to continue to remind my colleagues on both sides of the political aisle about the choice that we can make and can continue to make.
Do you think you can get, let's say if there are 50 Democrats plus you, can you get 9 Republicans? I mean, Senator Mitt Romney says that the reason this is all happening is because Donald Trump wants this issue as an election issue for November. He called it appalling what Trump is doing. I know you're reluctant to blame this on Trump, but can you get 9 Republicans? I mean, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, that's 3. Maybe Lindsey Graham. I mean, are you counting? Is there a chance this could pass?
You know, from what I heard after Republicans had a conference lunch today, they've decided not to move forward on this border security package. And again, I can't emphasize this enough, Jake. Each senator makes his or her own decision. We are elected by the people of our states to make decisions for our constituents. So none of us are controlled by any one person or a candidate or a president. Each of us make a decision that is right for our constituents, and we'll each be held accountable for that. Now, I will continue to urge my colleagues to be serious about taking a border deal when a significant conservative deal is on the table, and each person will get to choose if they want to secure the border.
Independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.